Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our webinar today. I'm joined by the wonderful Oliver Parker, who I've known about for, well, probably, I reckon it's about 8 years. I stalked Oliver on LinkedIn, and then finally we got to chat a few months ago. He worked with one of my clients, with one of our fractional finance directors, and they really rated his approach to recruitment. So I'm always keen to chat to fellow recruiters who do something a little bit differently. So I finally managed to stalk him and convince him to come and have a chat with me today, which is very, very good. Just by way of background, my name is Kate Clarke. I'm a chartered accountant turned headhunter, specifically in the financial space, and we work with scaling SMEs. And I felt that it would be really valuable to invite Oliver along to give his take on how he does recruitment, the particular roles, the exec roles that he specifically recruits for, and with the increasing trend of people trying to recruit themselves, maybe between us we'll give you some tips in terms of how what to look out for and some of the do's and don'ts as well in terms of the executive search space. So I will let Oliver do a quick introduction, and then it'll be very much a sort of a bit of a chat over the next sort of half an hour, 45 minutes. So Oliver, over to you to introduce yourself, please.
Hi. Well, thanks for the invite. Really appreciate it. So I'm Oliver Parker. I run capability consulting. Business has been going almost 10 years now. I've been a recruiter. I don't really like the word, to be honest, but I have been a recruiter for about 25 years now. Interestingly, I started doing finance recruitment and with nowhere near the same expertise that you do. But it told me a lot. My early days in recruitment told me a lot about the industry. I got a job doing senior finance, so finance director roles. I failed my maths A level. I wasn't an accounting expert in any way, shape or form. In fact, I really didn't understand what I was doing at all for the first probably 2 or 3 years doing that role. But within 2 weeks of going into that role with one of the big national accountancy and finance recruitment firms, I was responsible for a FTSE 250 FD hire, and it worked, thankfully, but it was fluke, to be honest, with what I knew of the business. And I got the job because I had the right accent, wore the right suit, I'd gone to the right kind of school, and they thought I had the right sort of profile. The fact that I didn't have a clue what I was doing at that point was irrelevant. And I stayed with that business for, I think, about 8-9 years, and I learned a lot. And by the end of the, perhaps 4 or 5 years in, I did really know how to recruit those roles. But it genuinely took that long, and I learned from my clients, not from prior experience. And literally the writing on the wall for me, the thing that changed my approach, that made me go independent, was when my regional director came into our office. We had about 50 people in the office. I was in Bristol. And this is before the days of kind of, mission statements and all that sort of stuff. But he came in and he had one of these big, super fat black markers. And he went and he wrote on the wall. And we all turned around and, he's got all our attention. And his mission statement was spray and pray. And basically his rule was throw enough CVs at your clients that they're befuddled and can't think of it, go anywhere else. And hopefully one of them will stick. And I just thought, wow, is that really what recruitment is? And I couldn't take it. I literally couldn't stand it any longer. And that was way back in 2004.
And that was the trigger. That's what inspired you then to set up Capability, was it? Yeah.
I had another business before Capability Consulting, independent, different name, a partnership actually. The partnership sort of fizzled out after a period, and I went established capability in, I can't remember, I think it was 2015, 2016, so almost 9 or 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And by that time, I'd been, an independent recruiter for a long time. I was allowed to really hone in on what I felt through experience would definitely get the right results for my clients, rather than just kind of following the rule book of getting the fastest number of placements each month and doing my figures. And the other thing that sort of changed really for me with capability consulting was that prior to that, I originally started with finance placements at a relatively senior level. When I went independent, I worked with more sort of SME type companies typically, rather than the big corporates that I'd perhaps been with previous. And so I expanded across the leadership team. So I would cover finance roles, operational roles, maybe sales and marketing roles, and MD roles. And when I started capability consulting, I became much more focused on a specific role, which usually the title being COO, maybe MD, sometimes even CEO. But fundamentally, it's what I call the right hand to an ambitious scale-up founder. So my typical client is a business, an owner who is hands-on operating their business, has very successfully built the business to a certain level, and perhaps doesn't have the experience, perhaps doesn't have the will to create the structure that would enable the business to scale to the next level. So my typical client is probably somewhere between 2 and maybe 50 million in revenue. Probably 10 to 100 people, or probably even 10 to 50 is more specific. There's a few clients that are larger than that. And they perhaps feel like they found hit a bit of a plateau, and don't have the skills or experience to create the structure which will get them to the next level. So that's really been my focus for 9 or 10 years now.
And I don't know how recently you've kind of been looking at sort of the traction model, but it might be worth, because obviously you've written a book, and you're a big advocate of traction, and obviously you do some stuff slightly outside of that, but it might be worth just kind of explaining the concept of traction and where your recruitment sort of fits into that as well, because I'm a big fan of it as well. So
well, traction had a huge impact on me personally as in terms of my business, and where I became. It's part of the reason why I became focused on that specific role. So within traction is the book that describes EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System. And I first read Traction 10 years ago, just at the time when I was setting up capability consulting. And there's a section in Traction called, actually, I can't even remember what it's called, but it's about people. It's about the people element of the business. And he had a really simple, fundamental principle that he applied to hiring. And I still use that principle now. And in fact, at the time, I used his language. Gino Wickman is the author of Traction. I used his language to describe how this sort of umbrella principle is. And the principle is that the person you hire needs to get it. They need to get their role, the business, the vision, the mission of the business and the role. They need to want the same thing. They need to have a passion for it, a drive for it. And obviously, they need to have the capacity to deliver the needs of that specific role. Really, really simple. But in most recruitment, it's focused on the third bit, the capacity, the skills and experience that you see on a CV. And it's simply, in my opinion, not enough. Unless you have that alignment with vision, values, and the mission of the business, that person, especially at the senior level, that person could be fighting in completely the wrong direction. And I think that can be incredibly frustrating for business owners. So I started using that get it, want it, and capacity to deliver it language. And I went to a dinner about 10, just as I was starting capability. And I sat next to a guy and he said, oh, that usual thing, what do you do? And I started talking about get it, want it, and how I applied that to my hiring. He said, oh, I recognize that. That sounds like EOS, in the book Traction. And I sort of read, went slightly red. Yeah, I kind of used his language to describe the way I approach it. And he said, oh, that's fascinating. My business runs on EOS, and I'm looking for this role called an integrator. And I said, wow, that happens to be the role that I specialize in. And he became my first EOS client. That was about 7 or 8 years ago. And it was incredible because the transformation that I saw of that role, and the role aligning correctly with the owner and the leadership team, it really radically transformed the business and where it was going.
So that's what. Sorry, go.
Right. Well, that was just, it's that transformation, it's that the ability to see the effect that a single hire can have that is the real motivation for me.
No, 100%. So when you have like a sort of a new client, do you obviously have a sort of an initial meeting, but it must be really important to make sure that they have that vision, because if they haven't got that vision, how can you recruit someone to get the vision? Is that kind of like, are you almost like vetting your clients to make sure that they are the right sort of clients to be able to recruit for?
Absolutely. I think everybody, every owner, every founder, wants to delegate, wants to get the right kind of support. But if they really don't understand what difference that role will make for them, well, basically the biggest question I ask, the most important question for me when I first speak to a business who's potentially interested in making that kind of hire is, are you ready? And it's quite interesting because they actually often come to me with the question, is my business ready? And the truthful answer is probably, if the business is at a certain scale, and wanting to grow, then the business is probably ready. The real question is whether the founder is ready.
Interesting.
EOS has a terminology for this. They call it letting go of the vine.
Yeah.
If that founder is able to accept the expertise that's coming in and pass across the responsibility and accountability and trust that person, it's a big ask. It's one of the reasons why this particular hire is so personal. It's so much about the relationship that the two people have. My clients often describe what I do as professional dating. It's creating a professional relationship at a leadership level that, if they don't really work, if that part of it doesn't really work, they can be the most talented person in the world, and the role will fail. So it's not unusual for me to spend 6 or 12 months talking to a prospective founder, a prospective client, helping them to be ready before we actually go ahead and make the hire. Gosh,
wow, that is quite an investment of your time, isn't it?
It is, but I'm enormously proud of the success rate that I have. Yeah. It's huge to me that it works. I need to be able to sleep at night, and to feel proud of the work that I do. And I also, the fact that I guarantee my placements for 12 months, for example, means that, I've got a lot invested in it. Yeah. And if I rushed into it, and went before they were ready, the chance, I'd be giving myself a 50-50 chance of failure, perhaps. And I can't afford that, let alone them.
when we've spoken previously, you sort of mentioned about sort of using Clifton strengths and stuff. Maybe you can come on and talk about that in a minute. But what are you looking for to know that they are ready? Are there key things that they say? Are there key actions that they do? What there's got to be a transformation, or maybe they come to you and they are already ready, but there must be something that they say or do where you kind of go, right, green light, I know we're now ready to recruit this person, and I know what that looks like. So can you maybe just talk me through that sort of journey? And if it is 6 months, then maybe it, yeah.
So I mean, I think this sort of qualification, if you like, applies to both the client and to the candidate that I end up discussing with them and recommending to them. And I think, you mentioned Clifton Strengths, and there are a couple of other tools that I use to help understand people. But I think we as human beings have always had a tool which is brilliantly designed, ultimately designed for understanding other people. And we tend to overlook it in our search for the latest shiny object or the latest tool. We tend to forget that we have this thing called conversation and chat. And when you speak to people and on a one-to-one basis, without an ulterior motive, and you help them to understand that you don't have an ulterior motive, people start telling you the truth. And the fact that the flip side to this is it takes time. As I've described, I typically spend quite a bit of time on the phone or on calls like this or face to face with my clients before we kind of sign on the dotted line and say, okay, let's go ahead and find the right person. And then when I'm doing, the other part of it, speaking to potential candidates, it really does take time. My greatest tool is spending, having 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 conversations with that candidate over a period of several weeks, where I really get to know them. I really understand them. And they also understand by that stage, and again, this is both sides, client and potential candidate, that the most important thing in that conversation is, from my perspective, is what's in it for them, and not to be led by the need to fill a role. So, for example, one of the things I described earlier on in my career was that, this intense pressure all the time to fill jobs, fill a certain number of jobs and fill it by the end, the 30th or the 30th of that month, 31st of that month, so it could go up on the board, and and you've got a deal, and we used to ring a bell and all this sort of stuff when we made a placement.
I'm so glad I don't come from recruitment. I just that environment just sounds awful to me. In fact, that was one of my motivations to do what I did. I just felt that there had to be a better way of doing recruitment, and like you don't like the term. So yeah,
it really is. It's like Wolf on Wall Street or
Wolf
whatever.
on Wall Street, absolutely.
It so is like that. It's bizarre. So, one of the reasons why, for example, I don't know about you, but I only take on retained assignments. I'm paid a small portion of my fee in advance, a kind of down payment. And then
that's exactly like us.
Stages of the it means I'm committed.
You just broke up a bit there, and there'd been a bit of fluctuation with the signal, but that bit, I've let the others go, but that bit was a bit critical. So what did you just say there?
It means so the retained nature of the projects that I take on, it commits me, my time, my energy, my knowledge to that project, but really importantly, it commits my client to their time, their energy, and their. Now, actually they don't have to do very much in the process, other than make sure that I know everything. And as I say, my typical process for that is mainly around conversation. I'll usually spend, once I actually take on a project, I'll spend a day or two on site with my client. I like to meet, obviously, the founder and the rest of the team, certainly the leadership team, and everyone, not everyone, but every level at least in the business. So if it's a transport and logistics company, I would want to spend a bit of time in the warehouse. I would interview, in broader sense, people across the business to really sort of get under the skin of it. What the guy in the warehouse will tell me, or the programmer will tell me, or whatever it may be for that business, is often quite different from what the CEO will tell me. And it's really important for me to know that, so that when I'm speaking to candidates, I can, they can go in with eyes wide open. If that makes sense.
Yeah. No, that does make sense. Well, it might be that it hasn't evolved, but has your vision for the business evolved over the past 10 years from when you started to now?
The role, so I've become more and more focused on that very specific role. I understand that very specific role across different, I don't have an industry specialization, but there is a kind of scale of company that I typically work with. And I think I've got a lot of experience of that type of company and how those roles apply, and understanding how it will work, or could work or couldn't for a particular business. You mentioned EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System. That was a connection that I had right, from the beginning of capability consulting, 8 or 10 years ago, and that's got stronger. I'd say around half of the projects that I take on are now EOS, companies running on EOS. So they know this role as the integrator.
Yeah.
And the companies that don't yet run on EOS, I'm kind of such an advocate of it. I've seen how effective it can be.
They end up flipping.
Yeah, I certainly recommend it. And it helps me to describe the core role that I cover for them. A client might, will quite often come to me talking about something that's a role that is very operationally focused. They're needing to get delivery, execution of product or service, or get it done right, kind of thing. And they see that as a core operations role. But I think the strength of the integrator, one of the strengths of the integrator role, is that it isn't just about operational delivery. It has an accountability across different functions, and it helps to enable across finance, across HR, and enable the communication and the resources sharing and understanding across those different functions. So I tend to see it as more a business operations role rather than operational delivery role, if that makes sense.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. It does.
And so quite often, as part of the conversation that I would have with an owner, it's a bit like a light bulb going off. Actually, so much more could be achieved with this role. With a bit of focus, and EOS really helps that. So, and the guys, they're called implementers, the people, the effectively coaches who help implement EOS into companies. They're incredibly helpful and generous people. I mean, it's part of their core values. I think two of them from memory are, one of them's help first. And another one is doing the right thing, and I really respect that, in the sense that I feel comfortable introducing a founder to one of them, and they won't try and sell EOS to them. They will talk to objectively about whether it could be of benefit to them, and explore. And I really respect that. So I mean, when I started, I think there were only 4 or 5 implementers, EOS implementers in the UK. There are about 40 now, and they all share these really strong set of values, which I respect deeply.
Okay. And I mean, if anyone at the end of the webinar wants sort of referrals to any of those implementers, then or if people, because we do this as a LinkedIn Live, people can watch it afterwards. If you're watching us as a recording, if you just put a comment in the LinkedIn bit, and then Oliver can then get back to you with with contact details or recommendations, can't you, if someone wants to sort of look at traction in a bit more detail.
I know the bulk of the implementers, the most experienced ones, really well. Some of them fit certain types of businesses. Some of them preferred working with certain types of businesses or perhaps in certain locations. So I can again give objective thoughts on who might be a good fit, which is often quite useful. Yeah,
that'd be good. And over the number of years, even from before setting up capability, how would you say that the recruitment landscape has changed in that time since you've been in the industry?
The thing that always used to, the sales heavy aspect of recruitment, doing the deal rather than actually concentrating on providing a service, always wound me up, and we described that a little bit earlier. I don't think that's changed a great deal. I think an over-reliance on technology tools, like I always used to think that I've always had an issue with certain documents that are used in recruitment processing, not just recruiters, CVs and job descriptions.
Yeah.
I don't think have a great deal of value in most cases. Most job descriptions look the same, most CVs look the same. So how do you use documents that fundamentally are just tailored to sell a person or a job? They don't give you a realistic impression of So if recruiters are using technology, which candidates for a long time have been sending their CVs in for jobs, they go into a system. No person even reads it. It goes into a computer. I can't even remember what they're called now, applicant tracking systems or whatever, where it picks out certain prescribed keywords from the CV, and that then gives the recruiter a list of 10 people that they think might be worth talking to about the job. To me, that over-reliance on that sort of technology is increased. Yeah. I don't yet know what AI is going to do with recruitment. I still feel a little concerned. I use certain AI tools to help me write profiles and things like that, and to do research. But I think recruitment is an industry, as an industry as a whole, tends to be over-reliant on these sorts of tools. And the reality is that any kind of recruitment, especially at a leadership level, in my opinion, is actually about people. It's about relationships. It's about alignment of vision, mission, and values. And if you ignore that, I think a lot of people end up hiring really talented people that just don't have any real alignment with who they are or what they're trying to achieve. And so a few months later, they're looking for another job because they hate it or just don't feel inspired by it. I don't know if you've seen, what's it called? A Gallup do a thing called the State of the Workforce, a survey. It comes out every 3 or 4 years, and it evaluates engagement in the workforce. And UK has one of the lowest engagement levels globally.
Interesting.
It has actually just gone up in the latest report, which is sort of a good news. When you look at a company and you sort of guess, let's say they've got 50 people, and you think, well, perhaps half of them are really love their job, they're really engaged. Well, according to Gallup, it's 10% of people are actually fully engaged in their work.
In their work, that's crazy, isn't it? Yeah.
It's
you know why it's gone up, don't you? It's because post-COVID, all the non-engaged people decided to resign and go off and have a life. have a life. So you're actually now left with more people who are engaged. But
it was 8% in the previous report. But the other thing was really scary, I can't remember the percentage number, but it was around 40% or 40 to 45% of people are actively disengaged. So they are trying to sabotage their company and their colleagues. That is really, really scary. Imagine if you place somebody at the sort of level that we typically recruit for, who is, even if unconsciously it's sabotaging their company, it can kill a company, literally.
So just on that then, have you got key questions that you ask at interview that sort of tell you if someone is likely to be a disruptor? So I'm just thinking about if people, because the sale with this webinar was, if people want to try and recruit themselves, we will give them some tips to do that. Can you maybe give some tips into how you would identify through those conversations that you have a disruptor, someone who is going to upset the apple cart? Are there any little nuggets that you could sort of give there at all?
Well, I think I mentioned earlier that my sort of key tool is conversation, and this is something that tends to be skipped past. There can be all sorts of assessment. I mean, obviously there are certain skills that need to be assessed. In finance, for example, you need to understand double entry. You need whatever it may be.
Hence why we have our double entry test. Yeah.
Exactly. But beyond that, trying to assess whether somebody genuinely has an alignment. I found Zoom interviews via Zoom. I do most of my interviews now via Zoom, and it had an interesting aspect to it. So because I'm talking to candidates about this specific role, and very often they haven't heard of EOS, for example. If I'm working with a company that's using EOS, I will go over my shoulder and I will find a copy of Traction and show it to them like this. And then I will say, oh, there's another book called Rocket Fuel, which is about the relationship between what EOS calls the visionary, typically the founder, and their COO, which they call the integrator. And I say, hold on a minute, I've forgotten. I've put that book on the other side of the room. I'll just go and get a copy. And I leave my chair and I walk around and I get another copy of the book. And then but before I leave, I say to them, I think you should go and buy a copy of this. It's really informative about, really give you a background of some of the key aspects of this role, that and how the foundation that this company are using to for you to understand this role is in this book Rocket Fuel. Let me go and I'll just go and show you a copy. And I walk around, and so asking a candidate, for example, to pay for something in a recruitment process, it quite often annoys them. And I'm not trying to. This is the thing. My calls are recorded. I then afterwards go to that point in the recording and I look at their face. Now I couldn't do this before Zoom, but now with Zoom, because we record the call, and as soon as I'm off camera, I've seen people go, like, what the fuck, and stuff like that. Yeah,
that is so.
Because I simply asked them to buy a book.
That's it. I thought you were going to say that the ones that then were quickly going on to Amazon to then look and do some research, you were then going to say they were the ones that you kind of felt actually I really want to work with. But it's the same principle. And interestingly, I'm doing the same thing now. So we record all of our videos, and it's only been in the last 6 months where it hasn't been me doing all of the interviewing. And I recruited sort of a panel of people now to do it, which means I now have the pleasure of watching other people do the interviews. So I don't look at the interviewer. I'm looking at the candidate the whole time to see their reaction to the interviewer. And so I can then pick up on nuances in terms of, are they touching their nose? Are they anything like that? Absolutely. To me indicates that they could be lying. Any sort of looking away, or there are loads of little nuances now that I pick up on when I'm watching it as a spectator, as opposed to me doing it live. So in terms of anyone watching this, that is like probably one of the best tips I can give you, is record your interviews and then watch them back, and then look for the other things. So one of the things that we do as well is we not only do a final interview where it's face to face like this, but we get people to pre-record answers to some interview questions. Obviously, this, but in that we are then looking for signs of, have they thought about their background? So, is there a mess behind? Do they make any apology for any, I had one the other day where there was a child crying all the way through the interview. So to me, that told me they didn't have any emotional intelligence to be able to kind of go, that's not quite right, or I'm sorry. Do you know what I mean? And we also ask people to talk through their typical working day. And that is a gem of a question. So, if someone tells you that they get up at 7 a.m, they go to McDonald's for breakfast, they do X, Y, and Z, then I know that they are not capable of being a senior finance professional, because they haven't worked out what's important to me watching that video. So there are so many nuances that you can pick up, and and that using the technology and using the videoing tools, I think is really, really powerful. So
absolutely. And the other thing I think is that is key for me, certainly, and I would say if on that vein of if for listeners who are wanting to hire directly, hire themselves, is the time thing of repeat conversations. Having a conversation about EOS, about traction, for example. I'm not surprised when I first speak to a potential COO, if they've not read it before. It's not everywhere in the UK yet. But I am surprised if they don't mention it on the second conversation.
Correct.
Because I make a big deal of it if it's an EOS company, for example. So I will always bring up things in each conversation, and maybe in a slightly different way, a slightly different vein in the next conversation. And if they haven't done anything about it, certainly by that next conversation, yes, that's a clear misalignment.
100%. Yeah. And I do something similar. So I quite often, when I was doing the interview, obviously delegate that now, but when I was, we still always ask the question about people's Excel skills. And if it becomes clear that, those, they need brushing up on, then, I will give them links to go and do it. And then when we come to then the final interview, if they then haven't done any of that research to then improve their Excel skills, to me, that is a big no-no. That just shows me that someone isn't up for that personal development piece. So yeah, you're right. And actually having our process like yours is quite lengthy, with the testing, the self-recorded videos, and then the final interview. Throughout that process, we are actually monitoring how they're liaising with my staff, because some people think, well, she's just an admin person, I'm going to be rude, not be polite and being abrupt in an email. That is a big no-no to me. I won't accept anyone like that. In fact, someone today was so rude to one of my team members. I've just said, right, we're not working with them. I'm not having it, because you don't want to have someone like that in your business. And so I'm very much like, no.
I think it's interesting about asking how they deal with different members of your team, and I think that concept of third-party opinion is hugely important. So one of the things I also do is I have what I call off-the-record conversations. So they're not references. The fact that they're off the record means that I don't share what that person tells me with the candidate or with my client. But I will go and find people that person has worked with at different levels. It could be their boss at some point, or it could be a direct colleague or a subordinate. So I'll give you an example. I did one. I thought it was a bit of a chance in a sense. I was risking this candidate who I thought was extremely strong for this particular role. And one of the people I found through his LinkedIn profile was somebody who he had fired about 6 months earlier. He, as a COO of another business, he had fired this person. And I asked that person if they would speak to me off the record. And these conversations are usually, only 10, 15 minutes.
But you don't get permission from the candidate to approach that off the record.
I sometimes do. Sometimes do. And obviously it wouldn't, I can't do it if they're in a current role, for example. I can't speak to their current role or anything like that. I have to be very discreet. So it depends. I ask where I can look, if you see what I mean. And they sometimes give me people that they suggest would be useful. And sometimes I can just find people that they may have worked with in the past.
Okay.
And so this is something I would recommend to a hirer if they're doing their independent. The difficulty for them would be that they're not seen as independent. They're so it might be worthwhile then finding somebody who would be a kind of third-party independent who could have those conversations. The fact that it's independent and off the record is what enables that person to tell the truth, to be really honest. And what was fascinating in that particular example was she had been fired by this person, and she was pretty pissed off about being fired by this person, but she still had overall her opinion of the person as from a professional point of view was positive and worked for the role that I was. So and I've got to be honest, I very rarely do one of these off the record conversations where I hear something that changes my opinion that I haven't, I've already gained of that person. It's usually backup, but it's really valuable to get that kind of. And I think the other thing is, in the other way is, after I've recommended somebody to a business, I usually recommend that they do their first meetings informally, one-to-one with the owner. But then, assuming that goes well, it's really useful for the candidate to meet other members of the team. And the team will give, again, very different feedback.
100%. Have you ever been caught out, though, where you've approached someone without the candidate knowing that you're approaching someone from their background, and then that someone has then gone, "Oh, did you know that Oliver Parker asked me for an off-the-record conversation?" Does that happen? Because we do verbal references, but we always get permission first for exactly that reason, because I think I would just be too embarrassed if someone then said, "Oh, Kate, you've been fishing around here."
I think I'm fortunate in the sense that it's always me doing it, so I can be careful, if you know what I mean. I trust myself in a sense, if you know what I mean, to double check who I'm speaking to, that there isn't a connection with the current employment or something like that.
Yeah.
I think if there's any risk of upsetting a current employment or a current employer, then it's not worth doing. You don't want to put anybody in a difficult position.
But they could still be, so you could find someone that they've worked with before, and they're still good mates. They still go down the pub, but they don't work in the current employment. And if you then contact them, then they're almost certainly going to say, Oliver Parker got in contact with me to chat
as a third
about you.
party, because I use this title Headhunter.
Yeah.
Partly because I don't like the word recruitment.
Yeah, 100%.
The other thing it enables me to do is to speak to somebody speculatively. So I can call somebody up and I say, a guy called John Smith. I'm interested in contacting him about a certain job. Do you think he'd be any good?
Yeah. Okay.
So they don't actually know at that stage that I've already contacted that person. I'm already in a conversation with that person. They think I'm being speculative and trying to make contact with him and find out more about him before I.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, it's good. my challenge is I find it really difficult not to tell the truth on things. So even that sentence I would probably really struggle with. It's amazing that I've lasted in this industry for 10 years, to be honest. But yeah, so there you go. Well, I'm conscious of time, and there was one thing that I really wanted you to chat about before we wrap up, which was the where we spoke the other day about like sort of the guidance that you give your clients about salaries. I think that would be a really useful nugget of information to anyone who's trying to recruit themselves. If you could just sort of elaborate on that, that would be super useful, I think.
Well, interestingly, I used to be, many years ago, I used to be responsible for doing a salary guide for our accountancy and finance placements. And what that meant was finding last year's guide and upping the salaries by 5 to 10% in each case. It wasn't, there was actually no scientific basis for
You're letting out all of the trade secrets now.
And so the first thing, is I would be pretty skeptical of what people call market rates. And I know that there are market rates. But I think it's important for an employer to pay what they need to get the outcomes that they need to achieve through that hire. And certain people can deliver more than others. So yes, in terms of how I describe my, there are typically 3 levels for the role that I look at, this operator or integrator role. So the first level is someone who has the skills, the capability, and some of the experience, but hasn't perhaps potentially. So for example, there are people who may be coming up through project management or who have had areas of responsibility across the business, but maybe not across all the different functions of a business. But they have some of the core essentials. So for example, I use this expression GSD, get shit done, as one of the core capabilities that an integrator or an operator needs to be able to bring to the business. It's very much a completer finisher role.
Yeah.
You can if you can see that in a person, you can see these different skills and the ability to bring it all together into that role. So that person, I believe, could well be really well motivated, but they're also, because you're typically paying for experience, this person is at the lower level of the salary spectrum. Mm-hmm. And I think because of the motivation, they can grow with the role, with the business. There's a strong level of motivation there. I like those hires, and particularly if it's perhaps a smaller business with a smaller budget, that can be a great way to get somebody like that into the team. Then you've got the middle level, which is market rate. This is the person who's done it, can demonstrate on their CV something similar, perhaps maybe a similar industry. You've got a bit of proof there, or a bit of evidence, at least. I'm not sure I'd say it was proof, but it's evidence that they've got the experience to bring to it. And those guys, would broadly be what people would call the market rate. And then you've got the third level, which I call the big hitters. This is the person who has been there, done it, taken a company very much like the one that my client has, and scaled it, 10x or whatever the guide is, and maybe done that 3 or 4 times, and they've got a black book of everybody in the industry and all that sort of stuff. There are 2 caveats, really big caveats for me with these guys. One is that they're really expensive. They kind of write their own ticket because they think they're worth it. And what you're paying for experience. But the other one, and the real danger for me, is they think they know the answers before they go into the business. They think that their prior experience will, and they also feel a certain pressure because they're, charging a lot more. They have all this background to deliver. And so, one of my core rules, if you like, is, I call it no guesswork, but it's basically about not making assumptions. And those guys, those big hitters, very often make assumptions about what a business needs to do to scale, and they don't go in eyes wide open, looking at that unique business, trying to understand how it will grow. And I've seen so many times now where I've been called in after a company has hired people like that.
Yeah.
And they've, I mean, in one case I remember, probably 7 or 8 years ago now, but where, a really, really successful company, mid-20s million revenue, growing rapidly, and the owner set his vision as at 100 million revenue business internationally, and he hired two, literally a pair of really big industry big hitters, and he paid them $1 million each for the first. And within 9 months, the business was literally on its knees. And I hired somebody. This was a tech business, a tech product business, and I introduced somebody who came from literally a sausage factory, and they made processed meats. But he came in, he understood that business really quickly, and he was able to get it to bring it back. But it wasn't his industry experience that did it. It was how he approached that particular company. He went in with his eyes wide open.
Do you know what? It's such a good point to raise, actually, in terms of we have so many clients, and I'm sure you have it as well, that feel that the industry experience is the most important point. And, I get it if you're in BD sales, black books and all that sort of thing, that could be important. But when it's actually looking at the operations or the finance function, as in our case, actually it's the nuance which is going to be so different for each business. It's someone who's actually prepared to get into that detail and work things out. That's the key skill set to look at, not the industry. The industry is someone bright will pick up the nuances of that industry within a couple of months. It's the application, the ability to roll their sleeves up, and that's why we do. So we quite often get pushback from CFOs about doing our bookkeeping test, and we deliberately do our bookkeeping test at that level because we don't want to work with the companies that we work with. Quite often the balance sheet's not being looked at. There's a mess to be sorted out, and you can't have someone who isn't prepared to roll their sleeves up and go in, get under the bonnet, and actually put in processes and controls and reporting and make things better for the business owner. So we're very deliberate in the way we get rid of. And actually, it also, going back to the rudeness to my staff, we've had so many rude emails like, do you not realize how important I am that I don't do, journals and stuff? And it flashes out people with an ego as well, which again, I don't think that you can have in these scaling businesses. You've got to have people that will work as a team, work together, get their hands dirty. It's so important. So
I think the mistake is to over-reliance on experience rather than skills. What you're focusing on, yes, I think absolutely people need to bring the right skills. And I think they need to fundamentally understand a business model. So, it might be quite difficult to move somebody from, I don't know, something like a marketing agency to a manufacturing company. The business model is fundamentally different. They've got a lot of work to do to make that kind of transition. But if they can understand the business model relatively quickly and have the skills to extract what they need. And the other thing that you touched on there, a couple of months, is time. Going in with their eyes open and being able to take the required amount of time to fully understand before expecting the payback, if that makes sense.
100%, yeah.
And I think there can be a huge amount of pressure on new hires to deliver very, very quickly.
Yeah.
And if they try and deliver before they really actually know what they're doing, they will probably fail or disappoint.
100%. In fact, one of the questions that we ask our fractional finance directors is, what would you do in your first 90 days? And the ones that are going, saying that I'm going to change everything straight away, for me, again, that's a massive, massive red flag. I want people to say, I will go and have conversations with the senior leadership team. I will then talk to the operational staff. I will then work out how it all knits together. And only then will I start implementing changes, having discussed my changes. Do you know what I mean? It's that those people that will bring the team with them, that's what we're looking for in that answer.
I think those kinds of assumptions, people going in with assumptions of what they need to be doing and where they need to be doing it, instead of going in with curiosity, that's probably the biggest killer of any senior role, in my opinion.
And
allowing that 90 to 100 days at the beginning to actually absorb and understand and build a plan for what they can deliver during that period is realistic and will actually achieve results positive results much quicker.
Well, my final question actually was going to be, what advice would you give business owners who are trying to do their own recruitment? And I think that pretty much sums it up, is actually hire for sort of someone with the curiosity to learn and develop, but also someone that will take their time to get there and don't put unrealistic pressures on them. I think that's probably my sort of sum up of the advice. I don't know if there's anything else.
I think the other thing is that the other aspect I find challenging for the kind of hires that I do is the owner's ability to, in EOS terms, let go of the vine, to pass across the level, and that that's fundamentally down to trust, and it's one of the reasons why what I do is so much about the sort of personal relationship. It sounds a bit corny, but can these guys sit next to each other on an airplane for the next 10, 12 hours and not want to kill each other? But because these, a visionary, an integrator, CEO and a COO, they're such different personalities, but they've got to understand and communicate very, very closely. So spend time on the personal relationship, I think, and so that the trust evolves.
100%. In fact, that does remind me of, I remember a while ago I was chatting to someone and they were saying they were doing a senior hire and everyone was on board. Then they went out for dinner and that person, I think, got quite drunk and they just realized, a bit like you're sitting on the plane thing, it was like, there was no way they could work together. So that is, again, a really important final bit before, at this senior level, to actually socialize with them in some way, shape or form, I think.
We've been conditioned, business people in general have been conditioned to hire, talent, the A players, all these sorts of expressions. And it's all about, the capability of that person, which, obviously you want. But if it isn't aligned to you and your business and the culture and the people in your business, it's going to fight against them. And so, you cannot just rely on somebody who's super intelligent, super capable, and super experienced. You've got to have somebody who aligns with you and then will apply it. And I would rather have 80% on the experience level, but 100% applied, because I know we're going in the right direction.
Yeah. 100%. Right, I'm conscious of time, so we better wrap it up there. But as I mentioned earlier, if you're watching this as a recording or you're watching it live, we can answer chat in the sort of the LinkedIn sort of comment section. So I might not get back to you straight away, especially if you've been doing this whilst we've been talking, because I can't monitor that and talk at the same time. But we will definitely both get back to you with any questions that you might have. So. Oliver, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you, and I hope that people have found our conversation useful. And I look forward to working with you in the future.
Super, likewise, and great to see you again. Thank you very much for the invite.
No worries at all. All right, take care. Cheers.
Bye bye.